I'd like to introduce to you Dr. Francesca Boyd. Francesca's work is focused on enabling connections to be made between people and urban nature for well-being. Francesca's PhD at the University of Sheffield focused on tailoring opportunities for engagement with urban nature for the well-being of university students. Specifically, Francesca is interested in how the university campus could be a resource to mitigate well-being issues through facilitating the salutogenic effects on engagement with nature. Francesca has worked as a social scientist in civil service and has been responsible for knowledge exchange at the UK-based Ecosystem Knowledge Network. Please welcome with me, Francesca.
Hello, thank you very much. And alongside everything that Audrey just said, I also do the AIPH Green City briefings. So you may well recognise me from the privilege of overseeing those, and many of you here today have given us the great joy of sharing your knowledge through that briefing series. So, for those who maybe find Francesca a bit of a mouthful or think that we may well become friends, you're welcome to call me Frankie. When I was coming up with this presentation title, I almost called it Leaves, Lectures, Lunchtime and Living Your Best Life, because I'm going to be talking about university students, and that really is what they want to do. So, I hope we're all going to enjoy this today as I take you on a whistle-stop tour, bringing together not just my own research, but also what has developed and happened in the sector since. I'm going to cover quite a lot of broad topics, so if there is a specific detail that you would like to talk about more, please do ask me that later on today. So let's start with university students. They're stressed. They've got coursework, studying, they've got to balance time and money, they've also got to work and do their lectures in the UK. This can be applicable in different ways across the globe, but generally we find the ONS study from the UK found that university students were experiencing significantly more loneliness than the general population. 17% reported that they often or always feel lonely, compared to 7% of the general population. They also find that since starting university, their mental health has worsened. That's that whole section of this group, 30% are reporting that their mental health has got significantly worse. And not only that, but they're also paying for the privilege of this experience. This could be seen as a unique career choice. If you think about it in the way that the campus is developed and designed, the way that you're interacting with the lectures and the facilities in a university, especially in the UK, we have a number of campus universities, so the university is in addition in control of their residential setting as well as where they're working. You can also see how some of this will be applicable to people such as nurses or doctors, where you're working in an environment that is actually very controlled. And that control is what I'm going to touch on today, because we've got a real unique opportunity here. When we look at how health and wellbeing is developed, and Marcus Grant, of course, from this special edition, is one of the core people who talks on this, the idea of health and well-being and your social determinants. The Marmot Review, the Fairer Society and Healthy Lives, which was published in 2010, found there can be a 10-year age gap because of these influencing factors. And those are things such as education, career opportunity, but also things like your physical built environment, the social connections that you have, how are you part of a community and how do you interact with it? What support does that offer you? And also the physical health that you're able to access. And this influences your mental health as well as your physical health. So that covers how we think about lectures. Now let's turn to the leaves. Nature. So we know nature is good. We've covered that extensively. And there has been many different ways that we can understand why nature is good for us. Lorianne touched on this yesterday in terms of the different roles that it has within our lives. But the way that we understand why that is happening is not actually something we necessarily fully understand. The mechanisms behind why nature is good for us is not completely developed and evolved, and actually I'm okay with that, because I think that a sunset is beautiful, and I don't need anyone to tell me why. And that's how I think that we can understand nature. There are other areas that really research this thoroughly, but for me, I'm happy to know that it works and it works well. It makes us feel better. And this study is actually a meta-analysis of other studies. So it's a study on studies of studies. And it pulls together 800 studies to say, yes, nature makes us feel better. The BMJ, which is a well-known medical journal in the UK, its Christmas edition, talked about nature prescribing. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel here. We've got stressed university students. We've got a potential solution. But how do we bring them together? So that's what I looked at for my PhD. How do we take the students away from the desk? And this is the University of Sheffield's library, but you'll see many libraries around the world that look the same. We have the books, the knowledge. We have the knowledge transfer happening there for those students studying. And then outside the window, we have the incredible world. We have nature. We actually have ducks just the other side of that window. And so that's what I did for my PhD. I looked at how we could develop interventions that go alongside infrastructure to engage university students with their natural environment that was already there better. So I used an app called Fact, which was developed as part of a larger study that I was part of the project. And this helps people to notice nature every day. I then took university students on a walk around the local green space. So this is actually the park that you can see through that window. It was beautiful spring in Sheffield. See all those trees in blue? No, they didn't bloom because we had massive snowstorms. And that's a wonderful thing about nature, isn't it? It's a little bit unpredictable. And so over this time, I took 63,000 steps as I walked students around this route. We had one group that did the walk only, one group that did the app, and one that did both. We then had a control group that had the app, so it encouraged them to notice something, but it didn't specify nature. So we still had this intervention of noticing, because we know that noticing from mindfulness practice is good for your mental health. But would noticing nature make a particularly big difference? And now here's a lesson for you in statistics. Nature relatedness, which is one way to measure nature, increased for the group that were noticing nature. And that had a correlation with recovering quality of life, which is one way of understanding mental health. And it was significant. But nature connection, a different way of measuring nature, had a decrease. So what's going on there? That's a bit weird, isn't it? And that's because nature relatedness studies a slightly different part of nature connection. But it's also why just relying on statistics, especially in this area where when we think about how beautiful a sunset is, it's not necessarily as simple as, yes, I feel better, or no, I feel worse. It's a far more complicated experience than that. So I'd like to move on to what I like to call data with feelings, qualitative stuff. And in this, the university students, through the focus groups that I ran, really told me what their priorities were. And this is where it comes into understanding how we integrate nature into a university experience or a campus. Their priorities were around time, work, and socialising. And work can be if they had a part-time job, or if they were taking part in a tutorial or had deadlines. And it's the idea that when I asked them, what do you think of some of the campus green spaces, we had one recently built, a nice like planter with some big trees and some seatings. They said, well, I never pay much attention to them. Because they're going somewhere, they're busy. Or, well, I just think it's just so busy, I'd never sit there. Because then there's just people walking by, and you'd probably bump into 10 people you know. I mean, she's more popular than me, I wasn't bumping into 10 people, but that's the way that it works when you're a university student. You're there socialising when you want to socialise. Or you're there to study. So if I'm there, it's because I want to get some work done. I'm not going to stop in that area. And what's really interesting about when we think about the natural environment is we can create spaces, as we've just seen from the brilliant presentations earlier, that integrate so that when you are stopping and pausing, perhaps when you're taking your lunch, you are instead stopping and pausing in a place that enables you to experience nature. It enables you to have some restoration, to allow your mind to settle. And when we start thinking about the behaviour change that we want to achieve, We can focus on particular areas. So we can focus on the psychological capability, so the idea that someone has the knowledge to know that they should go and visit nature because it's good for them. A little bit like understanding 20 minutes a day will make a difference to your mental health, much the same as people are encouraged to have 5 glasses of water or eat a range of fruit and veg. We could also have physical opportunities. So actually, where are we putting this seating structure? Where are we putting the trees? And also the social opportunities. So understanding that you can walk on the grass. And there's many different ways in which we can achieve that. But what I love about thinking about the social determinants of health and the behaviour change that we can fit within that is that there's also a spillover effect. So one of the papers in the special edition that I had the privilege of reviewing was looking at community health and campus users in 3 university towns across Texas. And one of the key findings they found in that, not to spoil it, because you should also read the paper, was that tree canopy cover had a real influence on some of these other health determinants. And that's not just to the university students, but those visiting and those walking by. So how can we create different urban green spaces? I mean, we've touched on it already today, but I'll just give you an example that I love, because I watched this develop during my time at the University of Sheffield. This is the Grey to Green project that happened in Sheffield, and you can see where they've taken out a main road, and then over time they've replaced it with a change in infrastructure, including making it predominantly a bus lane. What happened here was that you got this real beauty and change in the planting and in how the space then felt. And isn't there something unique about how we feel in a place? This also functioned as a sustainable urban drainage system, and it's now an area that I can say I would happily walk through, compared to before where if it was dark, you weren't really quite so keen on it. And there's been research from the Grey to Green infrastructure project which also showed the change in the thermal heat components of it. And I think when we're able to make massive infrastructure changes like this, we should also be doing longitudinal studies alongside it to be able to prove what we're doing, so that we can take it to other places and say, look, this is what we learned, and this is what we did. So the things I would take away when we're thinking about urban green spaces and from studying those university students and understanding them better is that what we're talking about here is the people, the process and the place. And Scannell and Griffith do a brilliant way of looking at this, to understand that we're creating places where people can connect with each other, but also with the heritage of that space. How do they connect? How do they feel when they're there? We're also creating places where people can reflect, where they're able to have a moment for their attention to restore, for their minds to feel better. And that can be achieved through natural features and through shelters. Every single one of my focus groups talked about trees with absolutely no prompting. And some people even said, do you know what's happening to the trees opposite the student union? Because they care, they matter, we feel a connection with them. And so it's about understanding where do we travel through and where do we stop? Where do we have our lunch? And when we're thinking specifically about university students, what are their priorities? So something that always irks me is benches in straight lines. Have you ever seen a group of young adults stand in a straight line to socialise? No, not unless they're at a concert. So why are we putting all our benches in the straight line? You know, when we go to that park in Sheffield, we sit facing the ducks. That's great for the ducks. They line up for our pieces of sandwiches, but that's not so good if actually what you are prioritising is having a chat with your friends. So let's stop putting all our benches in straight lines. We think about our senses when we're there, give our chance, our minds to restore and to be connected with the environment, to have a moment to wander. Let's not reinvent the wheel. We've seen from green prescriptions, we've seen from indigenous knowledge, that opportunity to connect at different levels as we experience the natural environment. And let's create places that we feel. And so that is why when we're thinking about those stressed students and their lectures, how we can turn to the leaves and how we can make that an important part of their lunchtime. Because their lunchtime is something that we, as designers, as policymakers, as those who are creating spaces and environments for people to work and study, do have an influence over. Let's create spaces that integrate nature into university life for better well-being. So to take that away, that's benches, senses and places. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Frankie. I do call her Frankie because we are work colleagues and I like to think friends. So thank you very much for that invitation to everyone else to become Frankie's friend. That was really fascinating and very apt and appropriate because this afternoon we're going to Education City, which is an extended campus around multiple universities. Just a question from my side. We've heard a lot through these sessions yesterday and today about how we have to justify the benefits against the cost. Do you have any experience from your work with universities and students and well-being, how universities would respond to, absorb the recommendation that they change the campus?
Yeah, absolutely, that's a brilliant question. So I suppose part of what we're saying here is we're designing for the communities that you're targeting, and we know that they have different priorities. So university students, young adults, for example, they have different response to nature to older adults. But on that flip side, and that's exactly the question you're asking, we also have to understand the people that are paying for it and what their priorities are. So actually, what is it that they care about that's going to make a difference? And for students, it's retention rates and grade achievement. And so a less stressed student, one that doesn't drop out of university, is an economically better student for a university. So if you're able to show that by changing this infrastructure, not necessarily massively, but by being able to prove that actually you would have lower sick rates amongst your staff, you have better attainment by your students, then you're able to justify why that's an expense now, but not an expense later. And I suppose the other part I would say to that is a university loves a league table. And there is now a World University Green Infrastructure League table. So the two universities that came highest in the UK were Nottingham Trent and Nottingham. And it's only because of the alphabetical way in which they arranged those names that one beat the other. Because the score was exactly the same. But you can start delving into that sort of thing, and you can say, actually, our campus is a much better campus to come to because we've got such a beautiful space. But not only that, it's a beautiful space that you can engage with. It's not just a courtyard that you look at from afar. So I think, yeah, really understanding what your stakeholders' priorities are and then digging into that is probably the best way to go.
That's very interesting, thank you. I do have a question there from David. You've prompted something in his mind. If we could, thanks Nick, I know you can speak loudly, David Boutier, but we do need to record this. And that's just a reminder to you all that all of these sessions are being recorded, and we will send you a link and they will be shared on our AIPH YouTube channel, amongst other things such as the Green City briefings, which Frankie has already alluded to. David, you have the microphone?
Yeah, first, Frankie, thank you. That was very thought-provoking and very interesting, as expected. So, campuses are special in a lot of ways compared to a lot of other urban landscape design opportunities. The size of campuses, the large part of a larger urban context that they occupy is often interesting. The ownership factors and the possibilities for making interventions because of that ownership. So there are a number of conditions that make campus design very special. So, and then you're talking a lot about the health and well-being aspects, which are very important, of course. And you also touched on some of the other important factors. Do you know of any guidelines or any special groups that are focusing on what I would call modern green campus design that are including this whole suite of possibilities, for example, biodiversity, climate resilience, and the health aspects, etc. Is there any special group that is focusing on climate or campus design and perhaps making guidelines?
Yeah.
And sorry to delay your lunch.
Thank you for the question. So the world, I'm pretty sure the order of the words is the World University green infrastructure network. They have this league table, which is made up of 5 components, and the role of health and well-being is a very small part of one part of that component. The other parts include things like how you integrate it with the curriculum, the engineering aspects of it, the role of reducing the carbon footprint of your campus in the first place. So that actually came out of Malaysia. A university in Malaysia started that, and I would say that's probably the best place to start looking for this sort of information. It's a strange one because when you're looking at it from like student support role and point of view, there's information coming out from like the charity Mind. They have a university mental health charter, which brings the role of place and health and studying into it, but it ignores then the engineering and urban planning aspects of it. So I would say you probably still have to sit between 2 areas to really get a full picture of how this is developing, but that would probably be the first place I would recommend starting.
A very interesting question, because obviously one has to design these aspects. You know, there's a program that we've been involved with at AIPH about greening school grounds, and there's some very strong themes coming through in designing school grounds for nature play, for nature as part of the curriculum. And it's early stages for the university campus, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think as we see university campuses developing because they want the latest library or the newest business school, they can easily see a green space being something that's replaceable. But just as we count the number of desks and show off about the thousands of books, I think we should start to do the same thing in the spaces we design. So why not say this is a place actually where we could have a lecture outside, or this is a place where you could go and sit and study. Now, admittedly, you need to be protected from the wind and the rain or the traffic, whatever it is that the student, and that's why you have to include the community that you're targeting, want to be sheltered from. Then I think that could actually be a far better way of selling your university experience beyond just saying, oh, look at us with our new thing. Like, no, let's say, look at us with our old tree. Like, we saved that for a reason.
Very good advice, we'll pass that on. Frankie, thank you very much again.